Welcome to the Giving Business Soul podcast. In this time of great change, we need a new blueprint for business, one rooted in soul. Here, we explore consciousness, metaphysics, human optimization, and Christ's teachings with individuals and guests who embody this philosophy. Join us as we bridge business and soul. All right. Welcome to the Giving Business Soul podcast. An absolute pleasure to be here today hosting my first international guest here, Dr. Kevin Preston. I want to kind of read a little bit about Dr. Kevin Preston. This is someone I connected with a while back, almost 7 years ago, and just an incredible human being doing incredible work. And I just want to make sure I communicate exactly what you're doing and what you're up to, Kevin. So this is Dr. Kevin Preston. He's a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, herbalist, and acupuncturist with over 15 years of clinical experience. He integrates ancient wisdom with modern practices, focuses on treating chronic illnesses, mystery syndromes, and optimizing overall health. His approach combines traditional Chinese medicine with studies in biological medicine, epigenetics, environmental toxicity, aiming to uncover the root cause of health issues and promote holistic healing. Beyond his clinical practice, Dr. Kevin Preston is also the founder of the New Human Events, where he leads retreats and events designed to ignite personal transformation and community connection. These gatherings emphasize meditation, breath work, and ancient wisdom to facilitate deep healing. He also has a podcast, A New Human Experience, and shares insights in his clinical practices and events to inspire listeners to provide their fullest expression. Dr. Kevin Preston, man, thank you for joining us. I'd like to kind of start these sessions, these podcasts with hearing what's on your heart. You know, what do you see for 2025 and beyond? And tell us a little bit about your overall mission inside the next coming decade.
Wow. Thank you. Great to be reconnected with you after 7 years and just watching the parallel journeys of both of us. And there's a lot of expansion happening. So I would say that is happening inwardly in my own life and, professionally, career-wise, but planetary as well. There's a lot of energy available for that. And that's been on my heart a lot lately. And looking at, for me personally, what do I need to clear off my plate? I've been adding a lot of things over many years and, starting to get more discerning perhaps. And simplicity is a big theme the last few months of my life too. And what can I, shift, clear, open up space for if I want to bring in new things and expand more, then we got to make room for it. So been in like a phase of purging and letting go and, old identities, things that maybe don't serve me anymore that I was really attached to. And and all of those layers. And so it feels refreshing. And I feel like I'm emerging from that into this new phase and running on the beach this morning, felt, the waves coming in and really, really grateful.
Yeah. Beautiful, brother. Yeah. Well, man, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. We obviously met 7 years ago in a men's retreat, and I was just sharing right before the podcast here that I knew you had a special energetic power because in that men's retreat, I think you were doing something where you were sort of pulling something out of me. And I don't exactly remember the details, but I remember the energetics of that. And I said, okay, Dr. Kevin is kind of an avenger, and he's got some special powers. And I'd love for you to maybe start us off by sharing a little bit about, where you got into all this energy work, maybe through your traditional Chinese medicine training and obviously, we both share this incredible love and devotion to the gene keys. And I know that you're just, at this point in your evolution, just synthesizing multiple bodies of work to kind of create your own individuated process and program. And I'd love to kind of give everybody a base and a context for how all of this started.
Beautiful. It kind of, to me, goes back to growing up in Central Alberta, Canada, farming, being in nature, being in the woods, hunting, fishing, playing in the rivers. And when I think back to those times, I can see how much that's influenced where I'm at now in terms of finding like my own nature. Because I think sometimes we forget as people, like we are nature as well. We're not separate from it. and the more connected we are with our internal nature and the nature of the world around us, then there's a lot of magic that happens, and there's doors and portals that'll open. And so I think that gave me a big foundation, even though I didn't understand it consciously at the time. But my connection with the trees and the forest and wherever I was, I spent a lot of time outside. And so I really draw on a lot of those experiences now when I'm working with people. And I can't even tell you necessarily from a conscious point of view, like what got me into Chinese medicine. There's some things that are logical, but I think it was more than that. You know, we talk about past lives or remembering that the way I grew up had no connection to Eastern medicine. And I didn't even know about acupuncture till I was maybe 20 years old. And then within a few years, I'm signing up for Chinese medicine school, shifting gears. I'd been in science before that and maybe going into Western medicine and trying to find my path. And I had acupuncture on my knee, and I'd had a lot of hockey injuries. I played a lot of sports. And I got acupuncture after one of my surgeries. And yeah, I think it was maybe 2021 at the time. And it worked phenomenal to help me recover, took away the pain, swelling, circulation was way better. When I went to see my surgeon for follow-up, he said, I don't know what you've been doing, but you're twice as far as anybody I've worked with what we did with your knee in terms of what I normally would see. And so I was like, yeah, acupuncture. He's like, yeah, great, whatever. Like, your knee's doing phenomenal. And it kind of sparked something in me of what is that? And I'm a really curious person. I like asking questions. And I think you and I share that in common is like, there's more to this story. So I started reading books about Chinese medicine, and the philosophy just really spoke to me, and it landed in a way that just made so much sense, that you would always treat everybody individually with whatever health issue they had coming up. And you would always be trying to work on the root issue of what is the cause here. And that just connected all these elements of my brain, even scientifically. That is logical. It makes sense. Yeah. You'd never do the same treatment for one person to the next, because the reason they have that going on is going to be different. So right away I was like, oh, that I need to follow that up a little bit more. What is that? And decided to shift gears, take a leap, moved to Vancouver, went to Chinese medicine school, didn't really know what I was getting into. And when you feel a direction, but you don't really know, and then you get in there, and I was like, oh man, this is way more than I bargained for, both from have I done the right step here? This seems overwhelming. And also, I am so deeply curious about what I've gotten myself into, and there's 1,000 times more to it than what I even imagined. And then my teachers, and they were all from China, and MDs and Chinese medicine doctors, and had vast levels of experience and wisdom. And language barrier was a little challenging in the beginning, because here's this Albertan, kind of redneck territory, simple, didn't speak any other languages. And then I have my Chinese teachers teaching me in their second language, Chinese medicine, that I know nothing about. And I felt bad for them a lot of the time, like trying to get concepts through to me. And I'm like, what? I don't understand. Because it took quite a bit to like shift my mindset to open up new pathways.
I can imagine.
And, when you're going into something new like that, it's a bit tough. Some of those pathways they can be a bit stubborn to open, and I just had to really stick with it. And admittedly, there was probably a time towards the end of the first year, I almost quit. And I think I was just feeling overwhelmed. I was in a new place, new people, new everything, commuting in traffic, which was new for me, and just trying to digest so many new changes. We had moved, I had left work, and completely new pathway, and moved provinces, and the buildup of new information. It was almost like my brain was almost at its breaking point of this is too much. Like, we can't synthesize this quickly enough. And I just remember sitting in class one day and feeling a choice point, and feeling like deeply overwhelmed. And it's interesting, this is coming up, I haven't thought about it for a long time, but one of my teachers, she was magnificent, barefoot doctor. And the barefoot doctors, if anybody's ever heard of that, the barefoot doctors in China were Chinese medicine doctors that would roam and travel around, and typically didn't have shoes because they were poor. And that wasn't their mission. Their mission was they go to villages in these rural areas that didn't have a lot of support or a lot of medicine, and they would live with the families, treat everybody in the village or in the little town, and they would carry on. And she came from that lineage. And you could tell, like, there's just so much wisdom. And I don't know how she knew, but I understand more now of, you know, reading energy and looking at somebody's eyes. And I'm typing, or I'm writing notes, and I was deeply conflicted of, am I quitting? Did I make a mistake in being here? I want to stay, but I'm struggling. And I looked up, and she was looking right at me, and she says, Kevin, are you okay? Right in the middle of class. And it was so confronting, because inside I wasn't okay. And I think I said something like, yeah. And I looked down, but she could probably sense and feel, and it was written all over my face that I was being really challenged in that moment. And I don't even know what got me through. I just was like, no, I need to stick with this a bit more. There's more here. My mind saying, like, let's bolt, you know, and how many times in life, maybe anybody listening could relate, you get challenged. There is that part that wants to run or give up or not go to that next level because you don't know what's going to happen. And so I'm glad I stuck through it. And by the time I got into second year, it started getting into my body and into my cells and my nervous system a bit more, and learning more about herbal medicine, which I knew nothing about, but I was intrigued. And by the end of that year, everything had shifted. I couldn't get enough of it. Like, I just studied herbs like morning till night, and, you know, all over the place. My place looked like a herbal mastery clinic of all kinds of things and stuff, and cooking things on the stove that smell terrible. And, you know, at the time my wife was like, what is that? You know, you can't do that in here anymore. You got to go outside. And, I really deeply fell in love with Chinese medicine and Chinese medicine philosophy, because the foundation of it is so rich in ancient history, thousands of years old, thousands and thousands of, you know, clinical case studies on people in real life, treating real elements to get results. And I think that's what attracted me to it as well. I'm practical. I want to get results. And I saw results with me. And when I got practicing, I saw results with others. And as soon as you start seeing some success and some results with helping people heal from things that maybe they're not normally healing from, then you can't help it. You want more. And, you know, then I dove into studying toxins, viruses and bacteria, environmental toxins, and just trying to understand more about the world around us, and really bringing a lot of the ancient teachings from Chinese medicine into more modern times of what are we exposed to now, though? We're not 5,000 years ago. All the things we've invented have an impact on the body, and how is it impacting us, while still respecting all the foundation of, like, TCM thought in theoretical elements, but bringing it forward in the best way that I could. And that just kept going, and it still keeps going.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, what's coming through as you're sharing that, it's like you were very early on into, like, merging the West with the East, you know, and kind of bringing these two sort of things together, so that, you know, because that's, as you know, obviously this is the time period we're in, right? It's a time of synthesis, and where the old and the new are sort of coming together, and East and West, masculine and feminine. So it sounds like really early on you started that process internally, and preparing you even for this time. And you were early to the game as well, you know, because now, you know, it's kind of a big movement here in the United States with the new administration and what they're bringing in and bringing to awareness, which you knew very way back then, you know, and barely people are now starting to, this actually has plastics in it, and toxins and mold and this and that, and sort of these invisible elements. And I can imagine, you know, where Western medicine failed so many of your clients and people that you're working with, and all of a sudden, here you are providing an entirely different perspective, and then they're healing, and you're just like, okay, I'm going down this path. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the advantages that I've had is I did science first. I was in, you know, science in college, thinking I was maybe going to go in that direction to keep my options open, maybe Western medicine or veterinary or, you know, dentistry or something along those lines, and trying to just find my, or sports physician. I love sport and athletics and the body, and through all those events, and then coming into a place of having that background, but then learning Chinese medicine from people that were born and raised in China, direct lineages. I feel like I got a really good education that over time I started to understand things in a different way and see kind of both sides. And it's that right left brain balance. And what I noticed is a lot of people coming in that were interested in Chinese medicine and maybe had tried it, but in some ways maybe they just didn't get communicated with well to understand what was actually going on for them in their healing process. And they couldn't quite stick with it, or they had acupuncture and it worked, or it kind of worked, and then maybe they only did a treatment or two, and they're like, this didn't really work. And they'd come to me and get referred in, and they'd say, I tried acupuncture, but it didn't work. And I'll say, well, how many treatments did you do? And they say, 1 or 2. And I'd chuckle a little bit, and like, it's like going to the gym. Yeah. I went to the gym once, I didn't get stronger. I'm like, okay, let's unpack that. But I found it was just communication. That depending on the case, depending on what they had, maybe 1 treatment would solve it. I've seen that. Maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 10. Maybe you actually need to get some deep work over a year or 2 with herbal medicine or with some detox. That's going to start moving the needle and get the results. And so I found a lot of the communication was lacking. And then as I started communicating more and people asking questions, you'd see the light bulb go on of, they weren't thinking about it in the right way. They were coming at it from a completely different paradigm. And it felt like for whatever reason, like I could communicate it in a way that they could understand, even scientifically, but then bridge them over to like more Chinese medicine terminology, but in a way that made sense. And not just talking about yin and yang or qi that they couldn't necessarily connect with coming from a Western culture, and some of the theories and the thoughts. And I'd give them practical examples and lots of analogies. And you could see the clarity starting to drop, and then they would see it through more, and they'd come back more long enough to get the results. And then they would get it at a deeper level of, I feel like a completely different person, but then they would understand why. And part of it, I think, is the way my brain works. Yeah. I want them to understand why it's working, not just that it does. Right. Because then they can apply that to their lives, and they don't need me in the same way moving forward. That wasn't never the point. And even some of the Chinese medicine philosophies, from a preventative point of view, there was this saying in the rural communities as well, that people would only pay their doctors when they were well, not when they were sick.
Oh my God, what a reversal.
Like paradigm shifting completely. Wow. That my role as a doctor in Chinese medicine is to make sure people stay healthy. And if I'm doing my job well and teaching and educating well, then they will. Wow. And they have to take responsibility too. Sure. And that thought process, I remember hearing that early on, and gosh, that landed so well. And I started understanding that at an even deeper level, and then seeing more causes of illness and doing my own research, working in the clinic, synthesizing all those things, just like you said earlier, and pulling all these different tools and pieces of what tools do I need in my toolbox. And if I came up against a case that I wasn't having success with and they weren't getting better, then I'm going back into ancient study, Chinese medicine texts from thousands of years ago, and maybe I need to study epigenetics more and understand what's happening in our world and society of things that are getting turned on in the body that shouldn't be, inflammatory pathways. And that led me to study, mold toxins are maybe significant, and parasites, and infections and latent infections and other toxins. Like, it just would go on and on and on. So I went really deeply into all of those pieces, and I started to see how it was manifesting in the body. And then when I started bringing those tools on board to deal with that and treat that, then saw a massive uptick in people's healing recovery, or things that are typically not supposed to go away, and then they would go away, and the patient's scratching their head and I'm scratching my head. I'm like, so you're good? And they're like, yeah. I don't have any of that stuff going on anymore. Like, how's that possible? I'm like, well, we cleared a bunch of stuff out of the body that your body didn't love. And the wisdom and the incredible capacity of the body to heal itself then could actually do its work, and brought you to this place of you're super vital now, and all right, see you around. Good. Wow. You can leave the office, and I'll see you down the road. And people would go on and get married and have kids. In some cases, they were told they never have kids, or they never thought they would even be healthy enough to be around to have a relationship. And I feel so grateful that I've had thousands of experiences like that, of then seeing somebody 5 or 10 years later, and I'm like, how you doing? And they're like, I'm so healthy. And they're vibrant, and they have that spirit like alive in their eyes. Wow. And they've gone on to have 6 kids, and found businesses and be
Amazing.
leaders in their community. And it's so wild. And I never take that for granted. Like it's always mind blowing, even now,
Yeah.
that every time I see an outcome like that, I think, oh man, this is incredible. What a privilege to do this work.
I love that, man. That's beautiful. Yeah, and it is. I mean, I can imagine just how incredibly fulfilling that is, and maybe that's the energy I feel from you. You know, there's like a virtue energy that I pick up from you, and I think when you've done such deep and meaningful work in people's health and people's lives, it's like people are constantly just sending you goodwill and prayer and energy. You know. And, I can only, that's, I don't know if you have the 7 gene key in you, but that's kind of the texture that I feel. And I can only imagine as a human, as a soul, especially in this consciousness that's arriving, to have, that level of touch and that level of reach. I mean, you've activated so many people, so thank you for all that you've done, Kevin. That's amazing, bro.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm grateful to every patient that's ever come to see me. I've learned something with every single one.
Yeah.
Every visit, I might see something I didn't understand before, or there's a nuance, or there's a subtlety, or the deep connection that we end up forming through somebody's health journey, especially when it's a really challenging case, or they've been on the healing journey for years and years and years and haven't got to where they need to get to and struggling or losing hope. And then suddenly we see a spark or something gets illuminated that's been overlooked, and just diving in a little bit more. And then we'll start pulling on that thread, and both of us have a breakthrough or an insight of like, oh, that I think we found a missing key here. Let's turn that key. And they'd come back a few weeks later and look like a completely different human being. And I would just be blown away of how amazing the body is. And so for all the people that have trusted me with their health, and to all the people that maybe it didn't go well with, that I couldn't achieve what I wanted to with them, and I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, and always did my best to show up. But the ones that maybe you don't get the results with, they stick with you a little bit more of, could I have done something different or better, or what didn't I see or understand, or maybe it just wasn't a fit. And sometimes carrying a little bit, I'm very human.
Sure.
Some of that grief or a bit of sadness, or not regret so much, just like, oh man, I'd like another crack at that. But I couldn't meet them in the way that they needed to. And, trusting that they found healing in another capacity, or it was right. There wasn't a mistake in that. Yeah. But I like going back through some of those things of, oh, I do see something different now, and I would treat it differently now, or how I would meet them would be at a different capacity. 'Cause this is all work that I've done within myself too. Sure. And, I think this is something that maybe there's a lot of resonance with you, and I know you to be somebody that has done an incredible amount of deep work on themselves, and then you're teaching that into the world more. And as leaders or anybody that teaches, we have to do it ourselves. Exactly. Well, I guess it's a choice. Maybe not everybody chooses that, but it doesn't feel right in my body to not do that. If I don't understand something myself personally, how can I teach that in a deep way? It doesn't mean I can't be helpful, but to really embody it or have that in the system. And so I think this is sometimes missing with practitioners, that they haven't maybe gone through their own soul induction deep process of stepping back into the fire and facing those deeper challenges. And any practitioners I've met that have done that on a certain level for a period of time, their ability and their capacity to affect a healing change or a spark in somebody is really powerful. Yeah. But without that, it doesn't seem like the energy, like the wave's not as big, or it doesn't maybe go as deeply. And there's things that happen with patients that I work with. I still don't understand how or why they healed, but maybe there is something that I've healed within myself that is by osmosis, just without even me being aware of it or saying it, something. We pick up things from each other in a healthy way too. And that's something I've always felt with you, of that deep reservoir of strength and energy that you've cultivated, but it takes time and it takes time to cultivate. And Chinese medicine talks about that too. It's it's not a miracle healing. Sometimes it is. I want to say that it happens. But a lot of times there's that cultivating the soil and the body as a garden versus the body as a machine. And that's a Chinese medicine philosophy too, of really looking at the system in that way. If you're going to grow a healthy garden, you've got to nourish the soil, and there has to be enough water and sunlight and all these components to really build something valuable and build something meaningful, that it's not one day to the next. And I know you've been on your journey for a long time, and
thank you.
I appreciate all the things that you share around that, because it just takes time. There's no skipping that work.
Exactly. As we know, there's no cheating in consciousness, you know.
No.
And so thank you for that acknowledgement. I really appreciate it. But yeah, that's a lot of what I also talked about. It's like, you know, before I teach anything, it's like I'm going first. You know, I feel it as a component of like sacred leadership. You know, we go first and test it out and check the waters and the temperatures, make sure it works. And then once I can understand it, embody it, then I proceed. But it's very cautionary for me, because I see so many disembodied individuals sort of, you know, they learn something right away on a weekend retreat, and immediately they're off to the races to begin to teach it. And I think it's a disservice in so many regards. And so, and I think what you're also saying, I love that, the way you colored it in the sense, like, you know, a lot of I spent a lot of time sort of reading and learning from Jesus and Yeshua and sort of the mechanisms that he used. And I go into sort of off the beaten path inside of that to learn more of sort of more of the roots of where he came from. And I believe that the way he did a lot of that healing was through energy, through frequency, through vibration. And I believe that when, as wounded healers that we are, when we do that and we move into the space with them, it's like there's an entanglement that begins to occur, and there's an activation that starts to unfold for people, and it's magic. It's you know, we can say that in a way, because the outcome, it doesn't typically, I mean, I guess, you know, magic is it's the unseen part, but once you actually can kind of begin to like unravel it, you can kind of see the connection, go, oh, that's how it happened, you know. But I do believe to be the case that when we do our own work and we are deep divers into the work of consciousness, the consciousness itself begins to influence those. And I can only imagine in your space, with how deep you've gone with medicine and consciousness as well, and your own health, it's like just the embodiment alone is probably influencing the outcomes of these patients, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, there's these times, if anybody's thrown their hat in the ring to be a leader or a guide in some way, in my experience, like, you will be tested.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that maybe I hadn't even consciously moved towards, of wanting to teach a certain concept or whatever, I would be getting met in challenging areas in my life to make sure that I could, you know, stand in there. And, you know, a mentor and friend of mine years ago, we talked about it, of like the crucible of life. Or like going back into the forge, and it's hot in there, and it is not comfortable, and it's not always easy. And sort of this vision I've had of, if we're all a sword, and I think this may have come through a book, I can't remember. You know, sometimes you take in so much information. Like, who said that?
Exactly.
Where, you know, beautiful acknowledgement to all these concepts that have, you know, come before me that I didn't create myself. That if we're all like a sword, and then we're shaped by our experiences as children and our full childhood into adulthood, then that's the shape of the sword, that's the integrity of the steel and everything else. That if you want to reshape that sword, if you want to reshape your life, you have to go back into the forge, and you have to get it back up to temperature and able to mold that in a different way. And so that's more of the conscious choice that can be challenging, of, oh no, I am going to go into this, and God, this is uncomfortable, and I'm struggling, and I feel like I'm going through like such a narrow part of the river, and it's just hanging on sometimes. That has happened many times in my life now, and I'm always grateful on the other side.
Yeah.
We're like, okay. Woo, yeah. That was a lot, but thank you. And to get support from like beautiful friends and teachers and other practitioners in my life, and having really good brotherhood, to be inspired to, you know, say, oh, this guy's been through this, like, I'm going to be okay, and get some encouragement where needed. Like, hang in there, man. Yeah. You're almost out of the forge, and then it's going to be different. And so I'd often thought too, as a practitioner, it was my responsibility to do that. If I was wanting to continue to increase my capacity to do treatments, that I could only take people as far as I had gone, and then I couldn't go any further, and I couldn't take them any further either. So then back into the forge we go,
Yep.
and come out again and again. And it is beautiful in some ways of how many times we can reshape ourselves as a human in one lifetime if we're willing to. And I know everybody's got their own journey, but that seemingly is part of my journey here. And then after going through something like that, even if it's something I didn't choose, and like a big pain or big loss or whatever it might be, there's a new reservoir that comes online to make it through, and a deeper level of resource. And, you know, we can speak in Gene Key's languaging here. Gene Key 48 is my life purpose.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's the well.
Yeah.
And the gift is resourcefulness. And I think years ago, I didn't feel resourceful. And I maybe wasn't. And through challenge or time and experience of just sticking with it and persevering, I started cultivating the inner resources that then could take me through the next challenge and the next. And then you start building and collecting new capacities or, you know, skill sets because you've had experience, and there's no skipping that. You know, we call it like earned wisdom.
Yeah.
That you can try. I tried skipping things for sure.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
You get brought back to it no matter what, especially if you want to embody anything. You're going to go to the lowest common denominator of where you're at in your system, and you'll have to address it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah. That's so often, that's kind of like how when I guide people through, you know, these sort of planetary initiations and escorting them into what I call the meta goal and consciousness, which is really the merging of that masculine, feminine, the two poles inside of us. I wouldn't be able to hold that lantern inside of that domain, you know, if I didn't travel the space really well. And, you know, and the best that I can do is just try to give them some language and frameworks. Obviously, at the end of the day, they have to do their own work, but it's like, okay, watch out for that little pothole over there and take a left there. Be careful with that one.
I stepped in that 7 times.
Exactly.
I got it finally.
Exactly. You know, and it's incredible, fulfilling work. And, you know, I think for us that are, you know, really deep in the work of consciousness and really working on establishing this, it's like, I think it's a requirement for us. And there's no, like I said, cheating consciousness at this point. And, you know, Annabelle and I say this all the time, but at this point in the evolution of my life, it's like, it's called like the choiceless choice. You know, it's like, I don't feel like I got a choice anymore. This energy that's guiding me, you know, it's taking me, and I just have to surrender to it and acknowledge what's coming up, accept, embrace, go through the process, take everything I got in my tool belt, and continue to like move through these alchemical paths. And sometimes, like you said, you go through moments of intensification, you know, that really just want to sort of, you know, create an opening in consciousness for you. And it requires a lot. But people sometimes, you know, that may not understand this work, they kind of see an exterior outcome already and go, oh, well, what I would give to be in your shoes. It's like, you know,
Are you sure?
Yeah, exactly. I've like literally been crawling through, you know, the underworld, you know, and gone and done things that, I don't feel like a lot of people could have done, but that's because it's my own journey. You know, I don't think I could have done yours. You know, yours was very specific to yourself and mine to mine. And, you know, we're all given the courage and the qualities that are necessary, but it is also based on, you know, are you willing? You know, because there is a price to pay in the sense that, you know, it just sort of breaks down a lot of conditioning and old habits and all of these different things. And sometimes people fall away and things move away, and it's very uncomfortable, you know. And but as you said, once you get to the other sides and these other places, it's just like I feel like I live such a beautiful life. Yeah. You know, just such depth and beauty and connection, and my ability to straddle the world and, you know, hang out with a homeless person and, you know, do that and talk to a billionaire. It's like, I believe that's really where it's all going, you know, this sort of new human, you know, and I'd love to kind of segue into that because, you know, I've obviously been witnessing you from afar, and, you know, we message each other here and there, but I believe what you're doing with this movement of yours and the community, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what is this, you know, this new human concept. You know, I think people who are listening can probably feel that the texture and the frequency from which you're speaking from, a depth, But I'd love for them to hear a little bit more about what this new human and this community that you're doing and this thing you're bringing forward.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I would say it wasn't something that I was conscious of right off the bat. More from a practical, standpoint of how can I help people do their healing work more, and how can I reach a wider audience, and just impact community, and bring people together more. And so I'd been in practice for a long time, one-to-one work and learning a lot. And then I started doing retreats and like smaller ones, collaborating, 10 people, 12, 20 people, and doing that for a few years. And then just having this impulse or vision dropping in. Where do ideas come from, right? I don't know, but certain things kind of drop in. And then I feel, I'm noticing there's a pull for me there. I think I'm going to action this one. I don't action all the ideas that come through my brain, that's for sure. Just doing like a one-day event with a bigger group of people, helping everybody connect in, maybe learning some new concepts, feeling some new elements, and just see what happens if we do that. Maybe I can spark some healing or activate a new consciousness level in people. And it went really well, and I hadn't yet named it the new human, but I did another one. It was a one-day event. It went really well, and just learning how to, facilitate and guide and connect in that space and step out of a one-to-one container. And then I started getting a vision of a bigger event, and like 2 days, deeper dive, different speakers, different practitioners, not just myself, and doing some meditation around that and sitting with it and walking in the forest with it. And stuff started mobilizing and people started, connecting, and I would share the bit of the vision or who I wanted to work with. And, somebody would say, oh yeah, I know that person. I'm like, oh, there's a door that opens. And then stepping through and connecting, and then still taking the leap of faith, because once I saw that vision with more clarity, I started going deeper into my own process because I had to. And I started noticing who is the person that's going to show up on stage at that event, and who do I need to become to deliver what is really needed at that time and space. And so all of my work was everything leading up to the event, and it was challenging because anything I hadn't faced within myself, huge insecurities or self-doubt, and then sometimes sharing this vision, which I'm sure you've experienced, and you share it with people, not everybody's on board. And in fact, some people told me, don't do that. No, you don't do big events. That's not what you're good at. You shouldn't do that. It's too risky. The people nobody's going to come, a million different things. And each one of those things, like I felt it, because I was like, I already doubt myself. Now it's being reflected in different ways, but I'm grateful for that too, because it really made me look at, what do you want to do? Are you going to show up fully in this or not? Are you going to do it or not? And if you're going to do it, you're going to have to face a lot of this and show up, and not everybody's going to be on board, and that's okay. But really it comes down to you. Are you on board with this vision or not? Do you trust this guidance coming in? Yes or no? And, I think anything that we're expanding in a really meaningful way, that's probably a normal part of the process. If you don't come up close a few times of wanting to quit, maybe you're not in a big expansion. And I don't know if that's true for everybody, but that's been my experience at times, that
for sure
I'm like almost, even with Chinese medicine, like I said earlier, I almost quit, but I didn't. And then even with that, bringing a new event online, I felt it a few times of almost stopping, and sitting with that vision over, a period of months. Then I thought, well, we're going to do this event. I'm going to bring in some people. I'm going to get some support. We're going to expand it. I guess I need to name it something. What should I name it? And I had all these different names dropping in that didn't really land or resonate. And as it often happens, I can't remember if I was maybe just meditating or sitting there in the forest looking at the sky or the trees, as I often do. And it just gently landed in there, and it was the new human. And I can't consciously say like where that came from, but that's what landed in. And admittedly, I didn't really love the name at the start. I'm like, nah, I'm not calling it that. but it was there, and it just stayed. And, you know, after a week or two, it started feeling that deeper resonance of, oh, I guess this is what it wants to be called, because I don't feel like it was me necessarily deciding that. I could feel the vision and the direction of, I want to help people heal and bring community together and connect in person. And yeah, I guess let's just call it the new human and see what happens. And it's almost like committing to that path more than started it showing up deeper within me and in the community. And yeah, we did the first one in 2023, and a good friend of mine now, Mark Groves, came and spoke, and we had a bunch of other amazing speakers, and you know, the community really showed up in that, and I felt so blessed and to be on stage in that capacity, and people wanting to hear what I have to say, you know, is still sometimes bizarre. It's kind of vulnerable, right?
Sure.
Everybody's looking at you.
Yeah.
You're standing there. I was never somebody that wanted to be on stage in all my years, and I find it kind of comical that that's the pathway that keeps unfolding, because older versions of me would have avoided. I think I did avoid it, to be honest, until I was ready. Without knowing I was ready, it's just started happening. But also consciously stepping forward and meeting some big leaps of, it may not work. It might not be successful. I might make money. I might lose money. And am I okay with those things? Like, can I hold that vision anyway with no guarantee of success? You know, you build it, they will come. Doesn't always work, but I'm trusting that there's like a bigger thing happening beyond me. And so now we've done 3 new human events. And I'm so grateful for the energy and the momentum, and it just keeps going. And yeah, I was beautifully fortunate to work with Dr. Zach Bush at the last one, and Charles Eisenstein. Yeah, good friends of mine, Mike and Courtney, my other friend Andrea. We had a beautiful singer, Zoe, and all these different layers woven together. And yeah, another friend of mine, Autumn Sky, amazing artist. And there was just so many elements of gifting coming into that space that everybody has their own blueprints to add to it. And, you know, it's like a symphony. Yeah. And there's all these different instruments coming in that can make some beautiful music, and that frequency moved through that space in a powerful way. And there's a lot of breakthroughs and transformations. At times I never saw more tears in my life in one room, and hugs and smiles, because we can have fun too while doing the deep work. But I felt really held by a greater energy beyond me, and I feel like I'm just gonna keep going with that momentum, and it's like the river currents flowing through, and the more I can let go and get out of my own head and get out of my way as much as possible, and just kind of listen more and be a guide or a steward to what's seemingly wanting to happen on the planet. I'm not the only one. You know, we're all seeing things new, and, you know, the new human, there's that languaging out there in the world as well. And, you know, Gene Key 19, the future human, and there's different authors of different books, and it's emerging, it's collective. This is not just a singular thing that's, you know, come into my consciousness. This is moving in a bigger way, and it feels like this is one of the roles that I'm meant to play in it right now. And who knows? Yeah. following the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Beautifully said. Yeah, it's like the what do you call them? Morphogenetic fields, right? That we're just sort of tapping into this new consciousness. And Merchants of Light and Betty Kovac's work, she sort of speaks to this idea that there's this sort of field over the earth, and that there are these beings that begin to descend, and, you know, and so it's like we're connecting into that level of consciousness. And I think what you said is really relevant too for anybody that is looking at doing great work and bringing something, you know, new to the world. It's like, if you don't feel a bit overwhelmed by it, it's probably not it, you know, because I often, just like you, just like, this is too much. Like, you know, am I really the person that's supposed to be bringing this forward? And very early on, the same thing. It's like people now see me on stage, or what, and you as well. It's like, that's the last thing I wanted. I literally was like, okay, I have this idea for giving business, so I'm going to get a CEO and a CFO. I'm going to put them all in the front. I'm going to be the wizard behind, you know. I do not want to wear the mantle. And, you know, the universe and God had a much different plan and said, no, this is your mantle, wear it. And this is what I've designed for you. And you got to have the courage to put this thing on. And, you know, and when I finally made that, I remember very clearly that moment in time. You know, I actually did a process. It's called, it's from Lars Muehl, and
Oh yeah.
he talks about the 7 days in the desert. It's in the Secret Teachings of Jesus and the Law of Light. And I did that 7-day process in the desert. And it's like every day you're in a specific prayer and doing a specific thing. And on that fifth day, and you're fasting and you're doing this, and you're literally not supposed to move out of a circle that you sort of set up for yourself. And I remember on that fifth day, it was like literally felt like shoulder pads just got placed on me. And I remember just sobbing and crying. And I was like, okay, like this is my role to play, and I can't deny what I'm experiencing. It was a mystical process. And once that mantle came on, and it was like the next set of events and occurrences and people started to kind of play in. And I think what you're also beautifully articulating there, and I know we talked a little bit about it on our Zoom, but it's like there is a guiding principle, right? And again, Betty speaks to it as the organizing principle. I think in Christianity you can call it the Holy Spirit, but there is an energetic sort of guide that's sort of moving us, along this process of ours to unfold what we're here to give the earth. And if you just sort of pay attention and attune to it, it'll just continue to guide you. But it's earned as well, and sometimes it's going to take you again through a really challenging thing. And as long as we do that work that we're being confronted with, and we do it, and it's like the next layer opens up, and it just keeps opening, and again, that's why it's just so incredible. And as I'm, beginning to lead a group of merchants through this process and giving them language for these things, like you've already been walking your path, you're a little bit further along in listening and being guided by this principle. And now that we understand that, we have a bit of language for it, we can color that in for the others, and say, hey, look, there's this thing when you devote yourself to this pathway of the soul and you really begin to emerge in this new consciousness, there's a guiding principle. The ancients called it an invisible college. It's something that is, you don't need a teacher, you don't need gurus, you just need to understand the construct, how it works, the mechanics. And once you got the frameworks for all of this, now it's just courage, and it's chop wood, carry water, and it's not gonna yield easy, because we're moving against thousands of years of sort of being moved in a different direction in our humanity, and we're now the frontliners, the wayshores, the torches on the front end, and it's only for the strong, But if you have that sense, if there's something calling you very big, this is the time. This is it's the time. It's the Renaissance right now, and it's exciting, as we know. It's such a incredible time to be alive.
Well, in some of these pieces, I think it's the Hopi prophecy, part of it anyway. Like, we are the people we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And you talk about like putting on the mantle. I feel like there's a lot of times in the past where I didn't. And I wasn't ready, or I didn't believe enough in myself to walk that path, or whatever it would have been. And there was things that needed to be cultivated. There was things that needed to be working on at a deep level, and different, like being a human can be deeply humbling at times. And, if you're stepping in a higher level of consciousness, anything that's not of that higher frequency will get burned away.
Yep.
One way or the other, just through the choice of saying, yes, I'm ready, for the next one, and you being in the desert and feeling that. Do you recall like the conscious choice of that? Or it just kind of happened because you were showing up so deeply in it? There was that moment where, okay, now it's here. Or like, what made you choose it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, the reason I entered into it, this was around 2017, and so I had what I felt to be a very mystical experience, and it was right on the eve of my 40th birthday, and it was just like a very mystical experience. I was completely, in my sobriety, and something just very mystically occurred, and At the time, I had a woman who decided to make me dinner for my birthday, and she was shamanically trained. And so when the dinner got served, we sat at the, she's like, "You want to sit at the table?" I was like, "Yeah, let's just sit on the floor." And, we're sitting on the floor, and I go to like just kind of stretch out my chest cavity, and all of a sudden this process begins. And it felt as if I was being showered in a golden light, and it just started running through me. And, I've had my experiences with psychedelics, so it felt very much in that domain. And I just started, releasing soft tears the entire time. And the process might have lasted a good, 15 to 20 minutes. And as that process sort of culminated, I just started to see my entire life in from the back, and seeing all the pain that I had experienced. And it literally started turning it into like a river of honey, and I just became so deeply grateful for all the hardship and all the turbulation and pain that I had experienced. And I just realized like the only word that sufficed in that moment was just thank you. It was just the right amount of hardship, that I could still endure it to get through it. And I had been practicing for 7 years at that point. The seven, it's the sacred secretion. I don't know if you're familiar with the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, and it's a very deeply esoteric process that occurs when the moon is in the sun sign when you're born. And it's this process where this oil is supposed to be descending. And so for 7 years, I was guarding that process and in deep process with it. And it just literally felt like my hemispheres came together inside of me. Yeah. And when that happened, it just sort of activated, I think, the next, it felt to me like that sacred marriage. And at that point, when you read a lot of Richard's work inside of that what he describes in there, it's like your life begins to be used for a higher purpose, and it just at that point felt like my life was no longer really mine. It was just I was just kind of being moved in a very mystical way. And then that's shortly after I decided to do the 7 days in the desert, and it just clicked in, and I mean, it was just, it was quite extraordinary. I'm writing a lot about it in the book, and so that's how it unfolded, that part.
I love hearing about the layers of the journey, right? Because we each have our own, and you spoke to that earlier, the core wounds in, both in Gene Keys, but just generally, even if people are listening to this don't know about the Gene Keys, the notion that like our greatest wounding is our greatest blessing. Yeah. It's our greatest gifting. Yeah. And if we can face that and alchemize that and work with that, then you unlock massive amounts of potency and potential to impact things in a really powerful way. And it takes perseverance though, and encouraging people to, whatever they get into that is a practice or whatever it is, like stick with it. Whatever it is, right. Just dedicate some level of consistency and discipline. And I found for me, like it does add up after a while. Like these practices, the deeper work, it accumulates. And then an opening like that happens kind of spontaneously, but we could also argue there was so much preparation that led to that moment to kind of bring you into a space or frequency to have that next unlocking happen. And I've been working on my own pineal gland a lot this year, and been aware of this through some of my clinical work and where people are stuck or blocked and what it looks like and some of the symptoms they may be having, and then how to go about moving through that. And this is why I think why a lot of people have gotten into breath work and different forms of meditation, because you can affect the change there, and then you can affect your chemistry. And this is something I've been teaching about a lot, is like the body is the last thing to exhibit change. Absolutely. Either up or down. And so anything at the mental emotional level or the energetic level, where electromagnetic batteries, so it happens with like voltage and electricity first, and then it becomes chemical. And so much of modern medicine is trying to treat at the chemical level, but then you're going upstream. The chemistry of the body is the downstream effect. It's not the cause. That. Yeah. So
Makes
if we
sense.
come up to a higher level of consciousness and frequency, then you're working with energy, then you're working with voltage of the body and electromagnetic forces in our system. And that is sending the information down the stream in our systems to then become physical. So this is where, medicine in my mind diverges quite a bit, that if we work at that level, then you can affect chemistry. And so you can affect your pineal gland secretions and chemistry, not by trying to treat it chemically, but by treating it energetically and from a voltage or, even mystical or the spiritual level, that higher refined frequency. Then we get to embody physically the results of that. So the physical body, and I said this on lots of other, I think, podcasts or when I'm speaking, like the body can't lie.
Yeah.
It's incapable of lying. So the
true.
body's always telling you the truth. Whether you're listening or not is a different story. Sometimes the body's subtle, but it will be communicating things. And how many times people have felt a frozen shoulder or their hip seizes up or whatever, and they think it's completely physical. And the more I practice, the more I go down this pathway, it always starts energetic in some way, shape, or form. And then when it's met on that level, the physical will go away. And different books I've read too, where they talk about, don't get rid of your pain until you understand why it's there.
I love that.
And of course, the irony is once you usually understand why the pain is there, it goes away because you understood the lesson.
Yeah.
So whatever that wounding is, whatever the things that people have been through, different traumas, different challenges, that is generally meant to help unlock you to a higher capacity of what your gifting could be. And to have you need to sometimes be in that forge of the fire to bring that open. It reminds me of the forestry elements that I spend time in mountains, and the different acorns or pine cones. And, that seed sometimes needs a forest fire to get cracked open. And it'll sit there dormant for years until it's brought alive by fire. And then it cracks that seed and a new tree will grow, but not before that.
Wow, that's really cool analogy too. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of so many things, but I think one of the things that we're beginning to discover, and I know a lot of what you share sort of parallels this, but I think what we're starting to discover is that obviously the grand prize is actually in our pain, right? It's in the stuff that we've gone through. The way I like to language that is just like, those are really the gifts that we were given. We were inherited with those things. And once we begin to understand that that's where the gold is, and we begin to travel towards it and begin to understand these things, and as we do, and we unlock, these understandings and these knowledge that was sort of stored in there, it does open up a lot more energy and pathways in the body, and movement improves and intelligence improves. It's like, I often quote this quote from Roger Sperry. He was a Nobel laureate winner, and he talks about 90% of the usage of the brain is used to actually move the body through time and space biomechanically in that way. And so the more mechanically distorted you are, it's like the more brain power is used for that. But as you begin to heal and the fascial system begins to open, and we start to have more fluidity, it's like then the brain's capacity then can go for intelligence, for healing, for metabolic functions. And, it's just incredible. And I always like to say as well, it's like the body is the final spiritual frontier. And it's like, as we descend this consciousness into the body and begin to live from a divine space, these beings of light within incarnated form, it's like, that's the new human. That's what we're aiming. And, recently, again, I was talking about these telepathy tapes, but these children are starting to give us an understanding of these sort of superhuman capabilities that we read about in probably, one-off did, or that doesn't really exist. And it's like they're actually pointing us in the direction of what's happening in our collective, And so, but I do love that idea that the body really, it's the storehouse, and that's why I've been so big on biomechanics and functional patterns and fascia releasing and doing these things in conjunction. There's so many people that sort of enter the domain of healing, and they certainly approach the emotional work and the spiritual work. But once something happens, it's like, oh, the body, The
Yeah.
body is the key. And as we start to enhance the vibration and the consciousness of the body, that junk DNA starts to get activated. And these gifts and these cities and all these different capabilities. And it's just an incredible journey to be human.
Well, we're in such an alive time because of that. And there's so much more languaging available.
Yeah.
There's so much more access to a lot of the ancient teachings or things that maybe we couldn't have even heard of before, that then we do get to learn it in a deeper level, and we get to get into things like telepathy. And I have seen this with kids in my practice.
Wow.
And there's times, you know, a family will come in, because I treat a lot of kids, or I have treated a lot of kids, and, you know, people of all ages really, which I love. And, you know, feel like what a blessing to be able to see the spectrum of babies and all the way up to, you know, people in their 90s at times and everything in between, that everybody has a journey and a story. And I'm listening to the body, I'm listening to what their organs are saying in the different ways that I do from a Chinese medicine point of view, and intuition as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember a few cases, you know, even some years ago, that, you know, families coming in and, you know, they have their child with them, probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. In some cases, I'm seeing them even younger. And I could tell immediately when that child walked through the door, the way he looked at me and I looked at him, he knew that I could understand him without words. And he didn't take his eyes off of me the whole time. And he sat quietly, and his parents said, he's sitting in a way that he never sits. Like, he's usually just bouncing off the walls and never stays still. And he just sat in the chair staring at me, and I'm staring at him, and we're chatting. And I was, you know, admittedly wondering how I was going to bring up with the parents that their son is incredibly telepathic. And that does seem like some gifting that's in my awareness as well, and cultivating more over time. Just even through my work, I think you're connecting with people in such a deep way to understand what's happening health-wise, that you almost can't help it over time. And so him looking at me, understanding what's happening, and so I did bring it up to the parents, and I said, hey, I want you to just have an open mind for a minute, that one of the frustrations that your son is having with you is he doesn't really speak. And he has a really hard time communicating, and he's angry and super frustrated, but he is communicating, but you're not taking it in. You're not listening in the way that he can communicate. And we end up talking about telepathy. And then they started sharing all of these things that started to make sense, and light bulbs for them of things that he would do that normally you'd think, oh, he doesn't really understand what's going on. I'm like, oh, yes, he does. More than you could even understand. And he's trying to communicate. He's just not using words. And so his whole body language and demeanor through that visit was sort of nothing they had ever seen before, and his ability to just come to a place of rest and calm. And I'm you know, quite grounded, that there was a field of energy that we could all be in. And I think it was harder for the parents to understand that's what was going on, but it's like, I need to bridge this gap for what they're not seeing or they're not aware of. And once that bridge could be made, things started shifting within their family dynamic a lot. But it was kind of fun, because him and I were having a whole conversation the whole time of like, I know, I hear you, and I'm going to tell your parents because you can't. And then, and his connecting with his parents even in that visit. And I've seen that a decent amount of times now over the years, and finally maybe at a capacity where I could recognize that maybe I couldn't before. I would just be like everybody else, and it would go on unnoticed and unmet. And as soon as that communication is there, and it's unmistakable, like the eyes, you know, and when they know that you know, and you're like, oh, here we go. But then something could move in that space that was deeply stuck. And it changed their whole family dynamic. And I don't think I really had to do anything spectacular there. It was just bringing awareness and shining some light on something that then, once it was named and understood, it could be worked with. And I think a lot of adults actually are having this awareness activate within them. And depending on where they are, who they're spending time with, it's osmosis. If you spend time with gifted people, it starts, you know, coming alive. And it's like the forest and the trees, they all communicate with each other. And as people, there's so much more going on with communication than what we're aware of in our auric fields and energy bodies and our electromagnetic spectrum. You feel each other way more than what you think. And so in a household, it's like one nervous system. And so whatever's going on in that household is felt by everybody, both up and down. And the more we kind of expand our awareness in that way, the body can start to feel relief, because the body will hold the tension when something's not being seen or met. And so the more we can bring presence to that, and it's not always words that are needed, it is our presence and our energy, then suddenly something can start moving again. And once that river flow, or that, the vital force, you talk about qi in Chinese medicine, harmonious qi flow through the body is what brings health and vitality. When it's stuck, that's an issue. If you can get that moving in some way, shape, or form, even just start something moving in your life, if things are stuck, more harmony will follow. And the more that starts moving, the more beautiful manifestations start happening, or successes, or, communication in relationship takes on a different quality, and suddenly there's deeper connection and more vulnerability, and there's nothing that's not connected in this.
That's amazing, brother. Yeah, these parents, I mean, you're such a gift to be able to bridge that world for so many individuals like that. Because, like you're saying, your humility is saying, it's nothing really that incredible that I've done. The incredible piece, I think, is the work that got you to be so deeply in your body that you can attune to something like that, and then you can bridge these worlds and give these families the ability to, connect in ways that were not available to them. So that's incredible. I love that story. And what it reminds me of is that, it's kind of like, the deeper we go into ourselves and the more in resonance we are with nature, it's like it just allows us to see deeper into the fabric of reality. And what you're doing, I think, with these children is just that. It's like they're so much like right here, and then you're right there, and it's like, we actually just had a moment before, with Jonathan, and we were in this conversation, and I said 2 words, and immediately he knew where it was going. It was just like, did you just read my mind? But that's what begins to happen, when you're just so deeply in the body, in the moment, in the presence. I mean, there's so much freaking data available through the body. It's just like, and I feel like I'm in that clairsentient, sort of field where I all my stuff is always felt through my body. So which is why I feel like, I often tell people, like, when you do this work in consciousness, you have a tendency to develop these clairs, as they're called. You can either become clairvoyant, clairaudient, cognizant, clairsentient. For me, it's like everything runs through my body. So as I begin to understand that, I begin to go into deep purification of the body, and better biomechanical movement and more emotional work, so that I can feel, when I'm in the presence with someone. And not only with someone, but just in nature and everywhere I go. It's just, it just feels amazing to be in that space where I can just gather so much information from people.
While you're in communion with life.
Exactly.
And I believe everybody has these capacities. There's just often too much clutter in the way. And that could be toxins, that could be lifestyle, that could be things that you need to let go of that you may not. You think, oh no, I'm not intuitive, or oh, Kevin's telepathic, but I'm not. And I'm like, no. Everybody is. I think we all have capacity to be able to touch into all the different, clair gifting, the, clairvoyance and all the other layers. That the more I do this work for myself, the more I realize it's almost like the clearing away. It just reveals and uncovers that which is already there. And so that we don't always actually need to add a lot to the body. It's the opposite. We need to clear. And so, for anybody listening, like, what are you doing in your life that's not serving you anymore? You already probably know it. I don't even need to tell you what it is. That there's sometimes is that deep surrender of letting go of almost like the sacrifice of a vice or something that you know is actually taking up space and blocking your capacity to be far more intuitive, to be able to connect and communicate in this way, that if there's a lot of debris in between you and I, then that communication, there's a distortion. It's like a radio static. And the more that static kind of gets tuned out and the more clear that resonance field is, then the communication's more clear on every level. Then we can feel each other more, we can understand each other more, and we can kind of meet in that space of deep reverence and respect, and in a loving frequency where there's less blame, there's less judgment, there's less of all of those types of frequencies. You can imagine when somebody starts dropping into that, the body will respond in magnificent ways. And so, like, I feel more flexible now physically than I did even 10 years ago.
Sure.
Not because I've been physically trying to become flexible, and I look after my body for sure. And I think that's being overlooked a lot right now in the world, and people are in the mind and like, don't forget about the body. Don't just focus on the body. All of these layers are important, but the physical body does start opening up, and the chest cavity opens, and there's more space for my heart now in there, because I've cleared some things to make room for it to beat more strongly and to beat in a greater capacity that maybe has a greater electromagnetic signature than maybe what it did before. So there's always the physical counterpart, but it's an exciting time that we get to have conversations like this, and people are maybe aware of it. Or if this is new, any of this that might be new, it was new for me at some point too, all of it.
Right. No, it is. That's why, I just appreciate you being here so much, because, we can go into these deep waters and we have language for it, and we've had our own experience walking, and so we can kind of color that in for others that say, okay, I've been feeling those things. And I know often, I'm sure when you're expressing what you've gone through, it turns on the light bulbs for other people, because it's like, we're just putting into language, sort of the realms of the unseen. And once you start to language the unseen, they already know the truth of it. And it's like, oh, I know what Francisco and Kevin are saying. I've had that experience. And that's what's so beautiful. Like, truth is truth. And that, and it's exciting to be in this time period right now. And I think where I'd like to maybe take us in as we're sort of closing this thing off is, obviously we're in 2025 here. Specifically in the United States, there seems to be an accelerated timeline. There's things that are unfolding very, very quickly. I made a post about sort of decoding the apocalypse and its understanding that it just simply means that it's the unveiling. It comes from Greek. And so it feels like we're in this time of where the veil or the curtain is getting pulled back. And it can be very deeply destabilizing, because the world, the sort of paradigms and worldviews. And, I thought, it's very hard for a good human to wrap their mind around the immorality and the depth of immorality that we've been living under. It's so hard, and I believe that, when you sort of begin these processes, and specifically the aspect that I feel that I want to kind of bring up is, is at the mystical core of the gene keys, which is called the 7 sacred seals. And this is a very mystical process. But certainly for anybody that has been maybe deep in these pathways, this could be a very good time to activate this, this teaching. This teaching is ultimately the activation of what Richard calls the Corpus Christi, which is the activation of the body of Christ within ourselves. So it's a very deeply mystical Christian sort of root. And, my process with those actually, that was the one, like, there's a point in my journey where he had the 7 sacred seals in Canada. It was in an island. Yeah. And that, I was following Richard's work, and I wanted to go so badly to that thing and wasn't able to make it. But as soon as he released the actual teachings online, I'm going to have to ask Richard one of these questions, because, every time he released like the activation, because when I first got into the keys, there was no activation sequence, there was no Venus, no Pearl. And it was literally like when he would release it, I was like waiting for the time with my energy, my shadow of greed. I'm like, I want to be the first. And when he finally released the 7 sacred seals, I immediately got those seals, and I immediately began working with them. And this became a very deep mystical process for me, where I just spent a lot of times. And for those listening, what it is, it's a process where he calls it a cellular apocalypse. That this apocalypse that's going to be happening, it happens within us. And that the seals that is spoken about in the book of Revelation are internal seals. And that when you begin to open these seals, you begin to sort of come into great revelation. And right now, my sentiment is that we're in the 6th seal, which is truth. And I think what's opening right now is this seal on a collective level, where a bunch of truth is starting to surface out, and for many people that are not prepared, very staggering, very like, I cannot believe this. But for individuals that have began the work of opening these seals, we kind of get a sense of what's coming next, and I'd love to maybe dialogue a little bit about you. I know that you're deep into these seals as well, and you've been working on them. What's been your experience with them? What's been the process for you with them?
I think when I started working with the first, not the 7th seal, to begin the process, grace, Gene Key 22, and within a week of starting that process and doing the invocations, there was so much grace that met me. And it brought me tears of like how beautiful it was, and that like deeply humbling moment of this amount of grace flowing through my life.
I feel that.
Wow. Okay. And almost just having to surrender that, because the mind sometimes has a hard time digesting that level of beauty and love and grace that can move through us. But I believe as we go through the different seals, collectively or individually, that's at the heart of it is our capacity to hold more loving frequency for ourselves, for each other. And if we look at that collectively coming into being embodied more, the people around me are going to be highly affected by that in a beautiful way, whether they even know it consciously or not. Like me in a more loving frequency is going to impact everybody around me, and that will impact them, and that wave continues. And the more depth that is embodied of what I can hold, like how much love can I allow to even be felt through me, that'll affect everybody around me as well. And it'll affect my cellular frequency, and it'll affect my DNA and the epigenetics in that expression. So as I deepen in my own process with these 7 sacred seals, I'm understanding myself more. I feel like I'm understanding the world around me more, and I tread a little more lightly. I have more grace for others. I give myself more grace than what I used to, because I could be really hard on myself at times, and the pressure that I would put on myself to create an outcome or even helping people heal years ago. If I couldn't help like cure somebody's illness, failure, I would look at that as a failure of me, and I would take it very personally. And it took a long time to let that go, and it was painful. And seeing like, well, this isn't about me though. This isn't even my role to do something onto somebody else or anything else. It's like, no, I need to just hold space for healing to occur. Let's build the conditions that would, lead to a greater chance of success. This person needs to take the responsibility. My responsibility is to hold a loving frequency and bring more grace into the office space and into their lives as well. And then healing would almost magically start happening. And so it was less about doing and more about being in a clear frequency and having less static. And so that's what I've been finding as I go through the seals. There is a more pure energy in my own system, or in my felt sense of it. And I can feel it in the space around me. And it doesn't mean I don't make mistakes or say the wrong thing, or, wish I could have a do-over with, actions or behaviors, or where, I fell out of integrity there. Okay, but I'm seeing it, and now I'm going to work on that. And I can see, here's a space for me to unpack some more patterns, unpack another shadow behavior, and it's ongoing. It's not like you close the door on one thing because you're done and complete. So I can feel that deepening through the seals, and they're meant to be contemplated over time. And, you know, you've worked with them in that way over a long period of time as well, that it takes time to infuse it into your actions and infuse it into your life, that it's not just a mental concept anymore. It's not just theoretical. As I take something in like that, how's my interaction with the person at the grocery store, or, you know, somebody I'm in conflict with, or we're not on the same page? How am I showing up in those spaces? And really looking at it practically of some of the seals, you know, truth, forgiveness. Am I doing that in my thoughts and in my actions, actually day to day? And where I am, okay. And where I'm not, then I'm going to keep looking at that, even if the truth is a bit hard to look at for myself. And then I can stand in that with more gratitude, more grace, and more embodiment of, you know, taking that in my everyday, all the little moments especially.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, I think those, you know, for those listening, again, if you've been in the work, I mean, those are an incredible teaching, because what we're moving into is going to require a lot more compassion, a lot more love. And we're going to need individuals to really take that frequency on and sort of demonstrate what is possible. You know, I always love, you know, Yeshua at the end where it says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they've done." You know, it really speaks to the ability of the human heart for forgiveness and that depth of capacity, you know, and I think for what's unfolding, what's coming, more people will need to sort of activate, you know, that level of grace in their life, and activate the depth. I think, you know, that's why I love Christianity, but I just feel like Christianity is such a bigger thing. You know, it's all of it is true, and it's even more true, you know, at a greater cosmic level to my understanding. And, you know, I think this is the greatest show in the universe. We all get to participate. We're on the front lines, and it's fantastic, brother. So thank you for sharing your work with the SEALs, and thank you for being here, brother. It's such a pleasure to host you and to spend some time, to be in your presence, and to just experience your energetic signature. And it's a blessing.